Bert was
But it
telling
was
me
funny.
what's wrong with my hair. So I was, oh,
Big flyer.
he was like you look awful.
It's like, just postpone it. He's like, do this tomorrow.
I gave her the stick it back. I gave her the
Sorry, hold on.
Like that.
Maeve's homesick. There's so much stuff going around like our area. I don't know.
Yeah, same here. There's like just random everything floating around. So,
but anyway,
yeah.
She's in the other room watching TV, and she was told not to bother me under any circumstances.
Like, this is important.
Mom's on a very serious Zoom. Bert was, because I was like, well, if it's an emergency, you can come. And Bert was like,
yeah.
He takes the podcast very seriously. He's like, do not, if you have something, come down and see me where he's working in the basement. Like,
so interrupt my paying job. Drink break. Fun. This is like the most fun I've had in the literary realm in several years. So I am enjoying it. So and we're not taking it too seriously. We're not letting it be a thing. Like, it's just good times.
It is.
So unless I get sick of you.
But I was thinking about the poem today, which I'm like really excited to talk about. But the fact that this particular poem is very, very different than this is when I had Maeve in my bed last night because she was sick and I was wide awake, like thinking about today. But I was trying to like come up like I don't know if there's been enough conversation about how to describe, like, you have like modernism, postmodernism, new formalism and all this stuff. Like, how would you even describe what poetry is today in the internet? Like, I was thinking, I'm like, is it meta poetry, like Facebook poetry, like social networking poetry? It's kind of like it's just and it's just, then it's like that's a technical term, Michael.
So it comes from the ancient Greek meh, and
then over time it lost the M.
Yeah, like there's a lot of what would it like? I mean, if you want to be generous, I would think there's a lot of like post confessional or meta confessional social justice poetry. If you want to be mean about it, it's just a lot of like narcissistic poetry, which I'm sure I've written. I don't know if there's been enough time, like, or enough distance between the last age and this age of poetry to be able to accurately describe it. But I don't know. It's like basically a new generation of poetry, and you see trends, but I don't know, man. I don't know what's going on.
Complicated though. It's like, because there is so many factors to like consider. Take social media being the biggest one, that everything can be published instantly, everything can be accessed instantly. There's AI poem generators. Then we have like the Instagram poets who are like basically combining this sort of micro poetry with maybe a cute selfie and all this kind of weird, thing that some people really, really love. I think people who are very, very highly dependent on social media networking poetry, and that's like where people are writing very similar type poems, very like highly lyrical, maybe confessional, definitely first person poems, and they're being circulated among like a community, but that it relies on that community, that social, Facebook, for instance, obviously, and the sharing of the poems and circling around to your social network of like your audience. And that's just way different. It's all way different than even when I was like, you know, in my 20s, when it was just like, there was, like you said, it's like self-addressed stamped envelope, you wait for the rejection letter, most things were in print. It was, you know, it was just different. And I think people feel like there's an amplified sense of self or audience by being on social media, but I'm not so sure that is really true. I think it's an illusion. And I guess what I'm saying is all of this will maybe 30 years from now, maybe longer, I don't know, it'll be like looking back as being like on the cusp of something, like something, this is either going to propel us into something different, or like it's just going to become like a way different kind of art.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I was thinking about, you know, they have that phrase page versus stage. We have the performance poets, and then you have the ones that are mainly writing in journals and things like that. And then you have like screen poets, I guess would be now, what you're describing with image, with a quote or with a short poem or whatnot. And that's been successful for some Instagram poets and things like that. But it's like the way I view social media now in a lot of ways is that there are just too many people that are doing this like pyramid scheme type of setup where it's like, I'm going to post my poem multiple times. I'm going to tag the editors who published my poem so I get a wider audience. I'm going to thank the person who inspired this poem or looked at the draft of it first time. So you're just tagging all these people, hoping that it'll basically, they'll share it or they'll spread it around. And it's just becomes this insular thing where it's like the same, you know, 7 or 8 people in your network are constantly talking about themselves, and it gets extremely exhausting. I am not learning anymore online.
I mean, we've gone over this too many times, but we can segue if you want to, because I wanted to talk about Emily Fragos's poem.
Yes.
And how I think it is so completely different. And it made me think about which poems will stand the test of time. And, you know, oddly enough, like the Instagram poets, Rupi Kapoor, I don't, did I pronounce that right? I think
it's Rupi Kaur. Kaur.
Oh, Kaur. What? Kapoor? What? All right, anyways. I don't, but anyways, good.
Just call her Rupi. We're real tight. We're on a first name basis.
She, I think she may stand the test of time, just in the sense of just like how many people, how widely she's been received. You can find her in every bookstore, and that kind of thing. It's fascinating. It's not my cup of tea of poetry, but I find that fascinating. But on the other end of things, I do think that Emily Fragos, even though I just learned of her, I stumbled upon her accidentally. And I think partially is because she's not on social media. She's not on Facebook. She's not on Twitter. I don't, you know, I think she lives in New York City, but it seems like she doesn't get caught up in any of that. But she's published 4 books. She won a Guggenheim. She is widely successful. And I think her work is going to stand the test of time. So I am very excited to talk about her poem today.
All right, let's get into it. I'm going to do our little introduction here. Welcome everybody to Table for Deuce, where we shoot the shit about all things lit. With me, as always, is co-host Kate Hanson Foster, who is the author of Midriff and Crow Funeral. And when she is not working on poetry, she is writing her favorite fan fiction to her band, Nickelback. Welcome, Kate Hanson Foster.
Okay, and I am here with Michael Schmeltzer, who's the author of Empire of Surrender, recent winner of the Wandering Aengus Book Award. Big deal. Also Blood Song, which is published from To Sylvia's Press. When he is not writing poetry, he is enjoying his brand new job as Twitter's chief free speech absolutist.
Oh no.
Anyways, the podcast is up and running for anybody who wants to go back and start at the beginning of our journey.
That's right.
Stream all of it like in bed while they are trying to sleep. Listen to
Just
our
binge. That's right. It's like ASMR. Just
Yeah.
soothe yourself to sleep.
sweet dulcets of our giggling and cackling. All right, we should get into this poem. I'm
All
excited.
right, let's go. Let's go.
I'm dying to know what you think. And because,
Here
like
we
I said, this was a serendipitous discovery poem, and I have some thoughts about it. I'm sure you do too.
Mhm.
And so should I just go into it?
Let us begin the toast or roast of Nemesis by Emily Fragos.
Nemesis. The old men with too much gamble in them, whose eyes are at peace only when all is lost, see the queen's quiet face on the deck of cards, the red cuff of her cloak, the raw tip of her tongue, the blood on her dress. What fled from them in their frenzies comes tiptoeing back, choiring, to the marble council hall, where Nemesis in velvet opera cape is beginning her recitative. It is your turn to go slowly now, with hands clasped behind your back, drowsy from the earth's sweet abundance and her great deprivations, the rows of crooked trees, the streets' bright monotony, and gather up the starving. All right, so that is Nemesis, Emily Fragos, and I bought the book when I read the poem, and I've been reading the book, and I have a lot of thoughts on that too, but obviously we'll just talk about this poem today. I already said a little bit earlier, but I am so fascinated by this particular poem. It's unusual to me. It feels different than other things I've been reading lately. I know it's not a new poem, but it feels fresh in the sense that in reading her work, flipping through some of her work, I haven't had a chance to read the whole book, but I don't know. It's very much influenced by the classical biblical Greek mythology, things like that. Those themes kind of come into the work in a very sly, interesting, almost like as if the speaker is kind of like a sage. I don't know. Just there's something very wise in the poem. I guess when I was speaking generally, I like this idea of, well, first of all, there's no first person. There's no I here. This is like I said, it feels like a very wise voice coming down and depicting this particular scene of these gamblers, these men playing poker, and then bringing in Nemesis is who in Greek mythology, I understand Nemesis as being the the maker of kind of restoring balance, I guess, in the universe, that she's sort of the embodiment of jealousy and rage. That was with the Romans thing. In ancient mythology, she was the goddess of revenge. Homer considered her to be divine justice, that sort of thing. And so it's an interesting choice, I think, to bring in a Greek goddess to what feels like a very present day real world experience of just gambling, kind of this cloud of karma that's going to circle back for being kind of gluttonous as a gambler.
So I liked what you said about kind of that sagely feel to this. I noticed that there was no I as well, because that is very different than what you kind of read nowadays. It feels like, and I do that a lot too. It feels like there's so much I and so much focus on personal experience at times. And I know you can't equate author with, you know, narrator of a poem per se, but it does feel like a lot of things are mostly confessional these days. But this is such a different kind of disembodied voice in a way, but it feels like that kind of Greek chorus where you have these players on the stage that witness everything and are basically calling it out to the audience in a way. They're letting everyone know what's happening. And so it has that feel, it has that like wisdom, like that you said. A lot of the word choices here, the diction is just stuff that I mean, like Velvet Opera Cape. I love the first line, the opening line, the old men with too much gamble in them. That use of gamble is such an interesting way to use that. Queen's quiet face on the deck of cards, like these rhythms in the phrasing, the red cuff of her cloak, the raw tip of her tongue, these kind of beautiful music within the poem itself. So like it was one of those where upon first reading, I wasn't sure, because it kind of took me time to acclimate. Like, oh yeah, this is something you can do in poetry. It feels like it's been so long that I was like, okay, it's readjusting to this kind of mode of poetry. But after sitting with it and things, I was like, okay, you kind of get a feel for what the author is doing, kind of sets the stage. You have this scene, you have these characters, and it does feel very much like a play or an opera. And it's putting this kind of epic lens to what can be very mundane. I've recently, you know, this summer I went to Vegas to celebrate my 20th anniversary with Lydia. So we saw a lot of the gamblers.
Yeah.
But it's kind of funny. I don't picture a Vegas per se with this. Like there's this very small bowling alley / casino right by where we live. It is the saddest, dankest, like miserable looking thing. And I'm like, oh, that feels more like this. I feel like this is more one of those places where people are just kind of just getting beat down by life and the gambling at the same time.
I'm so sorry. My kid's school's calling. Hold on one second. Okay. I'm really sorry. Hello? Coralie doesn't feel good. No, she says she can make it to the end of the day. Nurse Natalie's going to give her some Motrin. She's headachy.
So is me. I just gave it to her.
Yeah. Okay, honey. Well, hang in there, and if you want to put Nurse Natalie back on the phone real quick, I'll talk to her. You too. Bye-bye. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
All right.
The life of parenting.
Woo! Okay.
Everything.
Wow. I feel like it's always something over on my side. Things are going really well today. Arlo, would you shut You know, I got a little stuck on the image of the Queen of Hearts. Definitely that you know, there a lot of the gambling imagery was hard for me. Just for the Queen of Hearts, you know, if you open up like a standard bicycle deck of cards, the Queen of Hearts looks nothing like the way it is described in this poem. You know, there's no, at least in my standard deck of cards, there's no blood on, there's no severed tongue, there's no blood on the thing. So it made me wonder, you know, how much of it is literal and what's maybe just imagined. You know, the other thing I thought was interesting, you know, these old men, they have too much gamble in them, and they only feel at peace when all is lost. And that is such a interesting line, because you can read it two ways. You know, all is lost as in, you know, they're only at peace when, you know, they're maybe all is lost by their opponent, or maybe, you know, like there's something freeing about losing in general. I that was the line that I was kind of like, this is interesting. But then I kind of went to the Queen of Hearts and that imagery of the blood on the sleeve and all that stuff, and wondering if maybe it's more of a like when reality hits.
No, No, I think basically this whole poem feels, and I think I already used the phrase like this epic lens that everything is seen through. So I think putting these old men in this kind of setting that is much more aligned with like an ancient Greek play than a gambling hall. So you see these images that are much more heightened. Like I said, I don't think it's, even though it is talking about out, you know, on the deck of cards, I do think there's that certain sense of heightened emotion and imagery that comes into play. And it just makes it that much more of a journey or a tragedy or whatever it may be, that you get the sense that these are real forces that are driving these decisions or driving this loss or gain or whatnot. So in the way that, you know, gambling addicts and whatnot can talk about Lady Luck or all these things, you have these personifications of these things that are happening around you. So I think it's more kind of aligned with that notion that yes, it's a deck of cards, but it's simultaneously both things, that there's this kind of malevolent force, if you will, at times that can work with you or against you. So I think there's that.
To go back to the concept of Greek mythology, Nemesis, and this idea of like balance must be restored. And I love the idea that you know, Nemesis wasn't depicted as some sort of sky god in this poem. Nemesis kind of feels real and human as just a character in an opera. And opera, you know, is very like, you know, a very comprehensive art form, you know, with lights and costume and theater and singing and you know, throws the drama of life like in your face. People who are, you know, huge opera fans would say, you know, that they get sort of transported to another place by, you know, when an opera, like by an opera performance, especially. So if you have this image of, you know, the opera singer Nemesis, you know, doing her recitative or whatever to kind of restore that balance of like, you did your, you know, you did your poker game. Now it's time to get back. It's just so, I don't know, it's very, very fascinating to me in such a small poem, how much is being said about this, you know, what it's like to be human and how it's a give and take, and kind of how karma will circle back around in one way or another. It's ominous, this kind of idea of keeping people humble, retribution, you know, judgment, like it all kind of comes down on you in one way or the other, whether it's, you know, in the form of a god in the sky or in the form of like an opera performance. And in this case, which I think just humanizes it a little bit more, brings it like a little bit more back down to earth.
Yeah, no, I love the word that you use, theatrical. It feels very theatrical. This whole poem is kind of staged in a way that is really interesting. And we talked about editing before, and this is one of those poems where, as an editor, I would look at it not as something I necessarily liked or disliked per se, even though I do like so many things about it. It would be more like, what is its function? And does it accomplish that function? And it definitely does that for me. It seems like it opens up a different kind of world in a way. It sets the stage, it sets these characters. It has interesting dynamics, like what fled from them in their frenzies comes tiptoeing back. Like I love that image of this rushing out and then slowly coming back. So you have these conflicts and tensions throughout this poem that I think are really fascinating. And I just think the poet has definitely created a piece that has made its own world so successfully.
I'm doing my deep dive rabbit hole into her style, because you know, this poem in itself is just like, there's so many larger or it's a, you know, could be a larger metaphor. You can insert it in so many different situations, whether it's, you know, men gambling or something else that's self-indulgent, you know, and that sort of realization, whether consciously or inevitably, that it will circle back, that you know, there has to be that sort of yin and yang in the greater universe. I don't know, like there's just a lot that you can really take from this. That is, you know, once you've had your frenzies, you know, once you've had your jollies, that UPS delivery. Okay. Wow. Then I'm gonna need a studio that's not in the front of my house, in the middle of everything that's going on. Yeah, I don't know. I just think it's like a strange human epiphany happening here. She's so fascinating. The way she writes is so good. You know, I'm excited to read more. And yeah, I don't know. I like the style. It's challenging to read, and it's also makes me feel like I want to challenge myself to write like that. Take myself. She writes a lot of like second person poems. Like there's a lot of you, but it's not like the you we were talking about in Paige Lewis's poem, you know, where we felt like there was a you that was you know, like that they were talking to a you, like a very specific you that the reader is unaware of, maybe a lover, whatever. This, you know, second person poem is maybe not specifically in this one, but when she writes in these second person poems, it feels like this is gonna like dumb it down by saying like choose your own adventure, you know. Like you are in a room and you are about to open the door and you don't know what's going to happen next. And that, you know, but it feels that way where it's like, I feel like I'm going on an adventure reading these poems, that in just these little, by using all these different, you know, I don't know, Keatsian influences of like mythology and biblical references and all these kind of things that she employs in her work. I don't know.
I will say something that's kind of interesting. I think if I would have read this poem back when it came out, that says it's from October 2007, I probably wouldn't have liked it because there wasn't that influx of like I poems as much back then. I think as we've kind of progressed in the social media age, there's been a lot more, and that's just a guess. It's just kind of my anecdotal evidence of what I've seen kind of being published and pushed forward. But having read it now as kind of a response, or that kind of like palette cleanser to all the I poems, I like it more than I think I would have back then. I think the poem itself can be what's the word? I don't want to say like inclusive or exclusive, but I do think there is a certain kind of audience that this poem would do better with than kind of a current audience, let's say. There's definitely something that feels more traditional or old-fashioned about the way the poem is put together and kind of the content itself. I mean, when you're talking like kind of classical Greek mythologies or biblical references or opera and theater.
I 100% agree with you. Especially if we go dating back to 2007, I don't think that this film would have much of an impact on me either. But I agree, it's almost like sniffing the coffee beans, that cleansing. You know what I mean? Like clearing it out. It just kind of goes back to what is going to stand the test of time. I really do feel like that, you know, and I have so much admiration for what I've read so far, and also Emily Fragos's ability to stay off social media. She, you know, I know she, from what I read, she teaches, I think, and anyway, she's off the grid mostly, just kind of putting her head down, doing the work and writing these poems that are you know, winning awards and big prestigious awards. And I don't know, I not that matters, but there's like a wise maturity in these poems, and you could tell that they're very, or at least in this one, because this is the one we're talking about, very carefully crafted. I love the pace of it. I love the pauses, the ellipses. I love like the calm, very just laying it out there so simply in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 lines, right? It's not a long poem, and it's full of so much human wisdom of the general experience of what it's like to, kind of deal with our own impulses.
And as I was just looking at it, I didn't actually really notice, but it's not even like there's not even a period. It's like basically one long sentence if you count the ellipses as just a connective tissue there between dress and what fled from them. It's like it's not even really broken up that much. It's really interesting.
I'll be honest, I was wondering if I should sing the at the end, the recitative, whatever, like an opera voice. Made me wonder, like, if she reads it, if she actually is like, no, it's your turn.
I hope she dresses up in just this regal outfit when she writes, just a scepter in one hand and just typing in the other. All right, I think it's a good time to cast our votes.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
I roast this poem. It's terrible. So I am just gonna go ahead and toast this poem. I am so delighted that I found it, that I bought the book, and I'm still reading it. And I advise anyone else who hasn't gotten into Emily Fragos's poems to go into them. They definitely have all those kind of crazy medieval, biblical, ancient Greek mythology influences, which can be a little heavy, but I think the way it's brought into present day experiences is done so well, and this poem is a good example of that. That's how I feel.
All right. So I think like the poem title, from the title, which is very simple, all the way down to the last line, I think there's so many interesting things happening in the poem. I love the poet's use of language. I love the rhythms in the piece. I like the pacing. And there's nothing in here that I necessarily had to like look up in the dictionary. I forgot what it is. It's not necessarily complicated words, but it's complicated ordering and syntax and really interesting things that they're doing, like a real attention to craft in this piece. And like I said, if I read it back then, it probably would have been over my head, or it would have kind of thrown me off a little bit. But now, like I love the way you phrase that. It's perfect. It's that coffee bean snifter of like this cleansing kind of way. And it's so different from what I'm used to. And it opens up this world that feels very mysterious and very close by at the same time. So I am going to toast this as well. It is a interesting poem that is just kind of stuck in my head a little bit. It's just there, and it's kind of this tickle in my brain that I can't stop really thinking about, or this world or this style. It's very fascinating.
I agree. We talked about before, like when we pick poems to talk about, not to overthink it. So I was just kind of like spun the internet wheel and put my finger down. And that's literally how I found it. I was like, I'm just gonna pick this one, to kind of, because I knew it was going to challenge me a little bit, and the fact that it is so different from what I normally read, definitely from how I normally write. The style is so authentic, even if it's not like my go-to style. I can feel how genuine and the authenticity within it, that it's hard not to appreciate it and see. And we'll see. I mean, I don't know. Will it stand the test of time? I guess we'll never know.
Yeah, it's hard to say whether it will or not, but I do think it won't be dated in the same way a lot of things can be. And obviously there are people that can write really effective, beautiful poems about current events and kind of current trends in poetry. But that is also a gamble. It is so difficult to write an occasion poem or an event poem really, really well that can stand the test of time. And who knows, if there's poets out there doing this kind of stuff, let us know, because that's kind of an interesting kind of retro or throwback or classical, whatever you might describe it as.
I would definitely like to hear feedback on this poem, what people might think, especially people who are caught up in the current trends. I think, there is something that we all wrestle with where we want to be timely in our words, but also timeless. And, there's social justice poetry, which is important, but it also, you want it to have that universal feel that will stand the test of time. So it doesn't just feel like an artifact, of a specific moment in a specific time, but kind of taps into something more universal. Well, that's kind of how life works, like events happen, social things happen, we have new presidents, we do, all this thing or whatever, but it's like there is a universal current, I think, within us that just sort of keeps flowing, and good writing kind of finds a nice balance of finding, to relay something timely, but while also kind of embracing a timelessness in the delivery.
Totally agree. And I guess it would be interesting to ask some poets if they're thinking towards timelessness, or are they thinking towards the moment? And if because there are definitely some poems, occasion poems specifically, I'm thinking about like Amanda Gorman's poem that she read, and there are things that are very much in that moment, and that's the purpose of them. And so that probably won't be a timeless poem, but it was a poem for that occasion. So what are you writing towards? Like, are you writing towards this specific period? Are you writing towards eternity? If you want to be all fancy, like, I guess, I don't know. So who knows? What is the purpose of poetry?
Yeah, I think the purpose, I think poetry serves both purposes for sure. But I do think that most people are writing their story. I know, like my last book, I was writing a personal story. But I was also, I'm trying to stay conscious of like larger, greater themes. And I think, I think that is such a good point to bring up. Like, what is your end game? Do you have the desire to write as a social commenter, like social commentary poetry or something like that, where it's just, chronicling the injustices or changes of our times and things like that in a artful way? Or, is that just what you're feeling compelled to write? Maybe you'll write something different down the line. I don't know. There are like so many people who write definitely from a ideological standpoint, and that's their main goal, and that's all they want to do. As far as I can tell, Emily Fragos does absolutely the opposite, and and that was why it was such a, like you said, palate cleanser, because it felt like something I could pick up today. It felt like something I could pick up in 10 years. It feels like something I should have picked up 10 years ago. I wish, just because I don't, it is speaking to so many of these greater, larger themes that I think sometimes we neglect as we get caught up in our own microcosms, Yeah,
I do. Absolutely. Yeah, it's really fascinating to think about. And I just wonder about the poets who are writing more poems based on ideologies or whatnot. And poetry itself is such a small percentage of like the attention, like the global attention, that I'm like, I don't know, can you donate $20 to an org that's working towards social justice and have more impact than writing a poem and publishing it in a journal 5 people read? Like, I don't know. There are a lot of these questions that I sometimes get really really cynical about how much power poetry actually has and what's the impact of it, and is it all just us shouting into the void? Who knows? Does it actually create real change that we can measure or look at? So
we're like wrapping up and we're bringing up like big ideas.
yes,
But
we
yeah,
are.
if you're talking about like the, you know, the occasion poetry, I mean, that's kind of what the masses lean to when they are celebrating weddings, funerals. You know, they need, that's when poetry really, you know, comes in handy. And I do think that it's Rupi Kaur Rupi Kaur
Ruby car core?
Kaur
I am not sure.
Rupi Kaur Rupi Kaur we'll see. Anyways, I think taps into that that kind of general human need for words that they, you know, that they can relate to, that helps them cope with everyday simple experiences. Some of these things, these other concepts that, like in the poem that we just read, are larger, more complex. You know, you're thinking about the whole yin and yang and karma, and, you know, like restoring balance to the universe and Greek mythology. I mean, these are bigger, more challenging ideas that I think is not exactly 100% accessible to everyone. But I don't know. I don't know.
Well, it's accessibility in poetry is a really interesting thing. Like this poem that we just read, I don't think your average person will find it very interesting or be able to relate to it or think it's really anything. But Rupi Kaur, I bet you I could pull up any of her little Instagram quotes and get a majority of people to be like, oh, that's really good, or that's interesting, or that's, yeah, I could relate. So I don't know, there's something about that. Poets who aren't relatable versus poets who are. But I have a poem, speaking of relatable, for next week.
Okay,
so
great.
I think this will be a fun one, and where, since it kind of segues from this poem that we read and segues from the Instagram poetry, I'd like to talk about a viral poem. So one of our first, I've asked people to list off some poems that went viral in the poetry community, and this one went viral enough where it went like pretty much mainstream. So I would love to relook at Good Bones by Maggie Smith, and we will see if it holds up now that it's kind of had its moments. It'll come back at some point, I am positive. But now that most of the hoopla is sort of died down to a regular level, let's check it out again and see if we host or roast that.
Okay, I'm up to that challenge. Yeah.
All right. And then we'll just keep moving from there. So let's do it.
Oh boy. Well, well, this was good. This was a sorry for all the interruptions, but you know, such is life.
Life. Yeah, exactly. But all right. Well, I will see you again next time. Everybody, if you want to email us at tableforDeuce@gmail.com, let us know what you think about the poem. Let us know what you think about Rupi Kaur. Let us know how to pronounce her last name. Like, whatever you need to tell us, please do. That would be great. Otherwise, we will see you next week.
Yep, sounds
All
good.
right.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.
This is my dance moves before you come back. I used to be somebody. Awards and all that, blah, blah, blah.